Welcome to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. I am your host, Sharna Southan. I am an angel mum, a rainbow mum, a pregnancy loss practitioner, and trauma-informed coach. I created the Institute of Healing Through Pregnancy Loss out of my own experience with loss in the hopes to provide understanding and healing, educating people on pregnancy loss, and creating more women or men in trained support roles. In this podcast, I hope to shed light on what I wish I knew in relation to pregnancy loss, opening up the conversation, breaking the stigma, and bringing real-life stories plus guest experts. Thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello, beautiful souls. Today's episode is a part 1 of a part 2 series. So I hope you enjoy listening into part 1 and make sure that you do listen into part 2 when it becomes available as well. Now let's dive in. Welcome, beautiful souls, to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. Today I have with me the lovely Sarah Rollins. Sarah is a licensed clinical social worker and somatic experiencing practitioner in Michigan and owns a virtual group practice, Embodied Wellness, specializing in somatic therapy, trauma, and anxiety for adolescents and adults. Sarah specialized in developmental trauma and complex trauma. In addition to somatic experiencing, she also integrates EMDR, IFS, that's internal family systems, and an attachment lens in sessions. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Me too. I am actually really excited to pick your brain about this because I believe so passionately that trauma is a missing piece in the whole pregnancy loss experience. It seems to be that, not every woman is going to experience it as a traumatic event, but across the board, it's such a downplayed and dismissed experience. And women go through trauma and then they don't know how to actually support themselves out of it. Well, I guess they don't know how to acknowledge it as trauma and then how to actually seek the support that they need. So I'm really excited to have you here to talk about this because I know it's your zone of genius and it's something that I'm really excited to know more about as well.
Yeah, I think it will be great to put these two topics together.
Yeah, absolutely. In saying that, did you want to, share a little bit of background on yourself, sort of how you came to do what you do today?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been in the social work field for about 10 years. I started doing more adolescent and family work in the juvenile justice system. So I would go into homes, help adolescents stay out of juvenile probation and stuff like that. So that was a really unique experience. And then I moved to working in schools. And then I moved to working with addiction. So the fun part about social work is that you can move to various modalities. People work in hospitals, people work in schools, people work in homes. And what I noticed when I worked in addiction was that beneath most people's addiction was an untreated mental health or untreated trauma. And so what I realized was I didn't feel equipped to really address all this untreated trauma that I was seeing. And so as I was talking to colleagues, I found this amazing modality called somatic experiencing that really resonated with me. And one of the things that I felt was I already loved the modality. I just didn't really have words to it. And then when I read Peter Levine's books, who's developed somatic experiencing, I was like, oh, this is all that I've always wanted. And he's created this amazing modality treatment approach. So I started training in 2019, which, as we all know, the world came into a pandemic in 2020. So it was a very interesting experience going through this 3-year somatic experiencing training actually during the pandemic. And it was originally in person and then it got moved online. So I've been doing this approach since 2019 and hope to continue for years to come.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, the pandemic kind of threw a lot of curveballs, didn't it? Like the way that we kind of experienced our world became so different. And also I loved that you were learning that modality through that, because it was a lot of people were kind of experiencing a lot more trauma in different ways that they hadn't actually experienced before. And I know specifically with pregnancy loss as well, there was obviously a lot of women that were experiencing losses through the pandemic and having to go through it alone, having to go through all of that alone and not having. So I guess essentially, like with trauma, it's like we're not given that sense of safety that our body needs to be able to navigate what's happening around us. And our body goes into that survival mode. And I couldn't imagine having to go through something so big as pregnancy loss and having to go through it alone. And, they're in the hospital system, which is, again, that's the first touch point for a lot of women in their experience, and seems to be a lot of lack in compassion and empathy from the medical system itself, from all of the medical staff. So add that on top of it as well. There's just so many different elements to an experience that just would have added so much more trauma. So yeah, I guess it was maybe the universe's way of saying to you, we need you to do this through this time because you're going to learn so much more.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. If it's okay if I piggyback on what you said about having to do it alone, because one of my favorite definitions of trauma is that trauma is not in the event, it's in the nervous system. And what we mean by that is so often our world thinks about trauma as this accident or this abuse or this war. And those are events. But what we know, even pregnancy loss, right? That's an event. And what we know is that 10 people can be in the same event and have 10 different experiences. And so trauma is actually in the nervous system's response, not actually inherent in the event. And part of what happens in the nervous system's response is, how did I go through the event? Did I go through the event alone? When I told people about it, what were their responses? Did I feel like I could even tell anybody? And so that's part of this whole thing, especially with COVID. Other people weren't allowed in the hospitals. It was only one person. So physically being alone, but there's an aspect of that, but also what happens when I talk to people about it? Do people dismiss it? Do people say, oh, it's no big deal. At least at least X, Y, and Z. So I think it's so much more than the actual event. It's about, how did my nervous system respond? And that's not a judgment to say, oh, our nervous system did something bad if it responded in a way different than somebody else's nervous system.
Yeah, your nervous system is doing the right thing in that moment. It's doing what it needs to do, what it believes it needs to do for you to keep yourself safe. And like you said, it's not the event. So like once the event has passed, if it was attached to the event, that the feelings and sensations and everything else that goes along with it would pass as well. But it's not in the event, it's in how we inherently respond, our bodies respond to actually what is happening. And just in general, like there is so much that's dismissed and swept under the rug when it comes to pregnancy loss. Like even in my own experience, like it was a very, very, very traumatic experience for me. Even though I lost my baby at 7 weeks gestation, like it was a very traumatic experience and very dismissed, very much like even you said, people, like when you talk to people, how are their responses? People don't want to talk about it. People want to just know that you're okay. And if you're not okay, they're like, oh, well, actually, I don't know how to deal with that. So I'm just going to either ignore it or try and, yeah, like you said, you touched on before, like they'll say those little magic one-liners like, oh, at least this, or, to try and fix the problem, like fix the situation. I'm like, well, you're not trying to fix anything because we're not broken, but that's it. Like it's how essentially it seems to be such a common thread, unfortunately, through so many women's experiences, how dismissed and downplayed everyone's experiences is, regardless of the time, regardless of how their actual experience played out. Society just doesn't know how to cope. And then our nervous system goes into, well, I don't have the safety to actually tell anyone about it. So I'll just push that everything back inside and hopefully it'll go away. But it doesn't, does it?
Right. And you said so many profound things. I think not only the dismiss part, like we mentioned, but also blame. And I'm not an expert in pregnancy loss or pregnancy in general. So I'm not you're the genius there. Right. And so that's why we're coming together. I want to mention that what I do know about parenting and motherhood at any stage is so much blame. There's so much blame. Well, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you eat this? Did you take this? And it's like, did you sleep on this side? And I can't imagine how much blame, either consciously or unconsciously, comes with pregnancy loss, which just again adds to that. I'm doing this alone. I'm doing this without support. And part of what can be overwhelming about an event itself is that I didn't have support. I went through it alone, or I was blamed through it all. Obviously everybody has a unique experience too. So we can't talk about everybody's experience, but what we do know is I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's such shame and blame in parenting. Like, well, but did you do this? Did you do that? Why didn't you do? And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm just trying my best over here. Yeah.
You do that to yourself and then you have people do that to you. It's such a personal experience. There's so much guilt as well, shame and blame that you put on yourself. You run over all of the moments, all of the however long the pregnancy was. You run over everything to think, okay, what did I specifically do that I did was wrong? And then you have society putting that on top of you as well, going, you should have done this, or maybe this caused it. And then it just adds to it all. And then you just become this big nervous wreck. And I know for myself, which is why I wanted to bring you in too, because then the world becomes this big trigger. Like the world becomes this big, scary place. Our body is scary because our body let us down.
Mm-hmm.
Our body becomes a trigger. So every time you see something, I just did an episode on that today, which, essentially about triggers. If we get a period, it becomes a trigger. But then you go outside and then you don't want to talk to that person because you're afraid of that person actually saying something that's going to trigger you. And that's then our nervous system in play going, okay, it's that neuroception, right? Like our body is constantly scanning our external environment going, what's a threat, what's not. But then after these events, when our nervous system is stuck, everything kind of becomes a threat. And then we're living on the edge, like we're living our life as if we're walking around on eggshells.
Exactly. And if it's okay, something that I would like to share that really, really helped me in this whole experience. I think there's been multiple things that I've taken from my training, but one of the biggest things that I think has been a profound experience is really understanding what the nervous system does. And I want to give a big caveat. I am a social worker. I am not a doctor. I don't take, this whole, when I talk about this is a very basic level. I'm not talking about neurons. I don't even know what those things are. So hopefully people can follow me, because my goal is to keep it kind of as human as I can, because I'm very human and I don't read these big textbooks. So what I used to think was my body was the enemy. I had some experiences where, like you were sharing, my body was the trigger. My body had let me down. And that's real, right? I'm not here to tell anybody that their experience is wrong, ever. I'm not in your body. I'm not in your mind. I'm not in your experience. I don't ever come into anybody's world and say you're wrong, because one, we've gotten that enough in our world. And two, who am I to say? That's just my belief. So I want to start from that aspect of, it was my experience. And as you're saying, it is your experience that my body let me down. Right. And so that is our truth. And so coming from that place, understanding why our nervous system does what it does. So I'm talking about the fight, the flight, the freeze responses. There's some other responses, but I'm going to keep it pretty basic just for simplicity's sake. So I was just confused, like, why do I sleep all the time? Or why do I get triggered over things that, quote, other people don't get triggered on, or I shouldn't get triggered, or seem really small? And what helped me understand is the nervous system, a couple things, doesn't know the difference between real or perceived threat. So the cool thing about that is it's always looking out for danger and it wants to protect me. The hard thing about that, as people who've experienced trauma, is that we've used this word stuck, when it gets stuck, our wires kind of feel like they're crossed and everything feels dangerous and nothing feels safe. And that's the neuroception you were talking about. And so that's what trauma therapy really helps with. It's helping us not from a mind perspective, but from a body's perspective, feel like, oh, there are safe things. Not like trying to like will myself to be like, okay, I'm going to go out today and it's going to feel safe. And no, that is so much energy. And that to me is more exhausting than anything. So that's a big thing. Another thing that really helped me was that the nervous system, actually the body responds before the mind does. And I didn't realize that. So the other day I was driving down the road and there was like one of those big construction cones in the middle of the road. And before I even thought I should swerve, my body swerved. And that was really cool because then I didn't run into the cone and we didn't have a car accident. And there's many reasons that maybe I couldn't have swerved. So I don't want to blame anybody if they weren't able to swerve in that situation. I'm just giving an example. But then what I noticed is my heart started to race after, and I go, oh my goodness, like, are there any more cones? Like, I have to really stay on guard. And no one can see this, but I'm like pretending there's a steering wheel in front of me and like gripping onto it. So even as I talk about it, my body is getting into action. And what happened was my body was able to naturally come back to regulation after a few minutes when I was able to realize, okay, there's no more threat, relative threat. Okay. If I'm driving, I think there's some threat because I'm going, well, I'm in America, so miles per hour, but I'm going 70 miles per hour. But the purpose of that is the body does not consult the mind about how it's going to react in that moment. And on the one hand, that's great because the body goes first. If I had to wait for my mind to be like, there's a cone in the middle of the road. Should I veer left, veer right, slow down? What should I do? I might have hit the cone. But my body knew immediately what to do. The con in our society is that, well, I don't think this is a con, but this can be a con in terms of how we view it, is that the body is not going to look and say, what's the coolest thing to do? Or what's the most socially acceptable thing? So I'll give you an example. A trauma response might be to spit, to slap, right? Those are fight responses. But in our society, those aren't socially acceptable responses. And so then what we talked about earlier, shame and blame might come, guilt, like, oh my gosh, how could I have ever done that? But in reality, the number one goal of our nervous system is to stay alive. That's it. It doesn't care about looking cool. It doesn't care about like, what's the latest trend on social media? It does not care. All it cares about is staying alive. So if it perceives that, oh, if I spit, I'm going to stay alive, that's what it's going to do. And yeah, there might be shame, and I'm not denying that. And that's part of what we can work through too. But what I realized was like, oh, my nervous system all along has been trying to keep me alive. Like, that's kind of cool. So I always like to share that because for me, I always felt like it was in the wrong. It was the problem instead of, wait, all these ways are actually helping. It's trying to help me stay alive. And I'm here. And yeah, I have some bad days. And yeah, I'm still right. All these things. I'm not trying to ignore that, but it's doing its job because I'm alive.
1 in 4 pregnancies will result in miscarriage. 1 in 8 women will experience infertility. 1 in 100 women will experience recurrent miscarriage. And 1 in 160 births end in stillbirth. Have you been wanting to make a difference in the lives of women or men who have experienced pregnancy loss because you can see so many suffering in silence, but you just don't know how? Collectively, we can change how bereaved parents can access mental, physical, and emotional support after their experience. There is a lot of women with unhealed trauma, and there is a huge gap in the current support system when it comes to bereaved parents' recovery after loss. There are too many women and men suffering in silence. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is a worldwide, one-of-a-kind program that gives you proven methods designed for healthcare professionals, medical staff, midwives, nurses, doulas, birth workers, coaches, and angel parents alike. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is bridging that gap. It will give you a proven support structure to follow and education specific to pregnancy loss, created by a lost mum. It is creating more education specifically for loss so that you can enhance your service and become the point of difference. Or you can create the support that you so desperately needed in your healing after loss. This is the next level of growth and expansion you have been searching for. So does this sound like something that you have been searching for? Let's explore this more together. You can head to the episode show notes where you'll find the program application, or direct message me on Instagram and let's open up the conversation in how you can use this education. You have a gift, and I look forward to supporting you and witnessing you bring your gift to the world, healing and transforming women's lives. Love everything that you said. Actually, it was easy to follow along. So just putting that there. I like what you mentioned about the body's not going to consult the mind. And essentially a lot of the time what we do is we go straight from a traumatic event to therapy or counseling. And you're like, well, I mean, I did it. It was what I was told to do. So I did it. I went and saw a psychologist. But now knowing, I've done trauma work myself, now knowing how trauma actually affects your body and how it affects the nervous system. And I'm like, it's not in our mind. The imprint, the event that happened, our nervous system, it's such a primal response and it's in our body. There's no way, and you said it before, you can't will yourself out of it. You can't wake up every day and go, today's going to be a good day. I even tried that for years. I tried that and I kept failing. And I was like, why do I keep failing? And then more shame, more blame, more guilt because I was a failure as a person because I couldn't make these statements work for me. I couldn't be in a place where everything was okay because my body was still telling me it wasn't okay. It wasn't safe for me to do the things that I wanted to do. And, this is why I want to bring this conversation out because we need to start to process these experiences from our body and understand that it happens in our body first. And the responses are coming from our body first before we can rationalize it, before we can talk ourselves into it. And oftentimes we're so disconnected from our body is like, oh, actually, no, I'm not going to talk to the mind because what I've got to say, the mind's not going to like that anyway. So, and like you said, some responses from our nervous system aren't going to be socially acceptable, even if it is having an emotional moment down the street. Your body's got this overwhelming urge that it needs you to cry, to have a little meltdown. That in itself isn't socially acceptable. You can't see someone cry and have a meltdown. That's just not right. But in that moment, that's what your body needs you to do, to release everything to make it feel safe. But yeah, it's not socially acceptable to actually listen to our body, to listen to what it's actually trying to tell us. And this is where, if you want to share, I guess, a little bit about somatic experiencing and how we can start to shift from these nervous system responses of the fight, flight, freeze, and how maybe we can find that place of safety, that place of balance in our body again, because that's essentially what our body's trying to do. It's trying to find that place of balance and homeostasis. It's always trying to get back to, quote unquote, normal, to feeling normal. But we have to have the right tools in our tool belt to be able to do that.
Definitely. Yeah. One of the first things we learn in somatic experiencing is the body has the innate capacity to heal. And we believe that truly. Yeah, there's sometimes barriers and roadblocks and cones in the way. But at the end of the day, it's not coming from me as the practitioner or anybody else that's creating this capacity to heal. It's all internal. And sometimes we have to remove these roadblocks or whatever is getting in the way. And so one of the concepts I talk about all the time and I use in my own life is this concept of overriding. A lot of my patients call it powering through, which I think makes a lot of sense too. So I'll give you an example, and what you made me think about it while you were sharing that we're not taught to listen to our bodies. And then what happens is our body will send signals to our mind. Our body at the end of the day goes, well, the mind's not listening, so I'm going to shut off. And that's dissociation. And so, for example, I can't talk about every school in the world, but there's this conception in school when we're kids that we sit down and we listen and we sit still. So as children, we're taught to override our natural impulse to move in order to listen, even though that is not always how people learn. Stillness does not necessarily equate someone being able to learn and obtain new knowledge. So that's at an early age, we're taught, override your impulse to move, stay still, don't color, don't do this, right? Just stay in your little seat. You have to raise your hand if you need to go to the bathroom, and you might even have to hold it because maybe someone else is in the bathroom or we can't go right now. And so overriding in and of itself is not, quote, bad. What the problem tends to be is if we override so often that like I said earlier, we talked about, is that if our body no longer can read those cues anymore because I've held my urge to go to the bathroom for so long that now maybe I'm going to be extreme, but I get bladder infections. Or this happens with food a lot. So some people, because there's a lot going on or maybe an eating disorder, they'll ignore the urge to eat. We all have an urge to eat. And so that urge tells us really important things. I'm hungry. I need to fuel my body. And then what can happen is to say, no, I don't want to eat right now for many reasons, but could be I feel too large in my body. I don't like the way I look, maybe some of those shaming thoughts. The body can shut down those cues to eat, and then we no longer have hunger cues. So that's overriding, where now I cannot stay present to the here and now or my body's cues. And so one of the things we do in somatic work is we actually help people come back into relationship with their cues. And that can be really hard because it's like, I don't know what the heck is going on in my body, or I don't have any cues in my body. And so we start really small. Like, what are my likes? What are my dislikes? And it's not just jumping right into the trauma vortex, as we call it. We're going to start on the edges. So what are things that maybe I have an urge to grab a drink, right? And so what I encourage my patients to do is, can you grab that now? Can you drink now rather than waiting through the whole hour session and then you're parched, or you're holding that urge to go to the bathroom the whole time and you can't really concentrate on our session because you have to go to the bathroom, which that's okay. Where we can maybe pause the session, take as much time as you need, grab that drink, grab that blanket. Those are ways to start. And it feels like that's trauma work. Yeah, that's trauma work. Because what we're doing is listening to our bodies, and our bodies maybe never got a say. So that's one of a huge tool we start with.
I think that's a really important place to start. And like you said, because you don't want to jump straight into it, because if you do jump straight in, you have every opportunity of re-traumatizing yourself, embedding the trauma even further. So starting small and really paying attention, really just noticing these cues from our body, because like you said, we do get dissociated from them if we sort of ignore them enough. And it is important to, and like you said, it can start from childhood too. Like we are taught from a young age to override our body, even just in normal everyday society. Like you're born with an intuition, you're born with this unique connection to everything. And then at some point along our journey to being an adult, that's completely cut off. And if you tell anyone, oh, I'm listening to my body, they think you're crazy. So again, it feeds into just not having that support around you to go, actually, I need to actually listen to my body. My body's telling me this. But someone on the outside of you might go, well, you're just nuts, because like, why would you want to sit and listen to your body? But it's so important. And like you said, there's cues. Our body has cues for everything, and our body has the built-in equipment to heal itself given the right environment. So, taking the time, actually listening to those cues, to what it is that our body's needing in the moment, not half an hour later, not an hour later, not a day later. It has to be in the moment.
Yeah. And it's hard. I'm not perfect at it. And I don't pretend to be. I don't pretend to be this guru or master. And I don't think the point either. The point is that can I get curious? Because when we're curious, we can't be in a trauma response. And what I mean by that is I cannot run from a tiger and smell the roses. What can that happen at the same time? So part of this work is that can I get a little bit more curious about, oh, if I'm not sure what my body is telling me or asking me, instead of which my brain goes to is, what's wrong with you, Sarah? Why don't you know? Gosh, you should know. It looks like everybody else knows. That's my narrative. So what I try to do is get curious and say, okay, well, that gives me the opportunity to potentially spend a second listening. And it might just be a second, because maybe that's all I can tolerate right now. And if I have no idea, that's okay too. But that's a place to start. What I will say is, because I would say a lot of trauma, not all trauma, happens due to lack of support or in a relational context. So, right, with family, with friends, there's a relational aspect to trauma, abusive relational stuff like that. Getting the healing through a relationship, right? A safe relationship with a therapist or a healing provider, whoever you feel like works for you, is part of the healing. Because if we're trying to do this alone, we're just in that same spiral as before of, wait, I had to do that alone. I had to get through that traumatic experience alone. And now I have to heal alone too. Like, how isolating. Where maybe, just maybe, there can be someone out there, not every moment of every day, of course, but there can be someone out there who can support us in this process. Like, I don't do this alone. I have my own therapist, and I don't pretend to do it alone. So I think part of the work is, yeah, there's stuff we can do on our own. And I encourage my clients, when I talk about overriding, to notice patterns between sessions. And part of the work is actually in building the safety between us, that maybe it is okay to ask for something in our session. Maybe it is okay to say no to me in our session. Maybe it is okay to say, I don't feel like talking about this right now, and having me listen and honor that. Because that is part of what happens in our traumatic experiences, and why our nervous systems continue to have to stay in fight or stay in flee or stay in shutdown, and kind of, they can also move around. So, I think the relationship aspect is so important. And that's why we don't do this alone. And that's why, yeah, we can read books, but it's not the same as doing this in a partnership, in a therapeutic healing relationship.
I really like that you said that, because it is so important. There is that element of, you can only do so much on your own. Like, you shouldn't have to heal on your own. You shouldn't have to be trying to figure all of this out on your own. You need someone on the outside of you to help you, to be that safety net. And like you said, have that safe relationship, building a safe relationship with someone on the outside of you so that you know then that you can voice what is actually happening. You can start to experience what safety feels like with other people. Yeah, so I think that, like, I really love that you brought that in as well. Like, I always say, you know, I'm no stranger to saying to people that I have my mentors as well, like my people that I need to have on the outside of me, because we can get so caught up in what's happening to us that it's like putting blinkers on. You can't see what's actually happening sort of on the peripheral, view of your life, of what's happening to you. And when you're in that place, when you've got tunnel vision, there's no way that you can support yourself out of what you're actually experiencing, what's happening for you on that day, in that moment, that week, that month. And like you said, you can kind of just keep getting stuck inside of this like spiral.
Thank you for listening in with me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Take a screenshot of this episode, share it to social media, and tag me at Institute of Healing _PL. I love seeing what is resonating with you right now. If you want to chat further, I invite you to connect with me through Instagram. Head over and follow my Instagram account, send me a DM, and let's open the communication. If you want to know more about how you can be the support for others, head to the show notes and fill out the application form for the Pregnancy Loss Practitioner certification. I want to also note here that what I share within the episodes is not medical advice. If you need further support, please consult your doctor. Thank you again. Much love to you. Be gentle with yourself, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode.